All right, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick with Channel Bites. I am excited to talk to the infamous, the genius, the famous Mr. Bill Tracy from Structured. We have a treat for you today. We're really excited. He's allowed us to have a good conversation about what gives CISOs a fright because it is Halloween season. So, Bill, thank you so much. Thank you for allowing me to interview you today and have a quick conversation.
Happy and excited to be here, and can't wait to talk about what's giving folks a fright right now. It is definitely the season for it.
Tis the season. All right. Well, let's jump right into it. So, obviously, with Halloween, we all think about horror stories, and but I think let's put it into the framework of the IT world, and let's start off with what's the thing that you've heard recently that's given you a good scare. So, like the scariest breach or the gap you've encountered in the work that you do at Structured. Maybe just to give some people some context as we start this conversation.
No, absolutely, and this is it's the time that CISOs are doing a lot of their 2025 planning. So we're having a lot of conversations out. So with a client recently that was part of a merger and acquisition with their two firms, and call it the one side of the house was traditional applications they were working to modernize, and the other side of the house that was part of the merger was 100% built from the cloud, probably almost 10 years ago now. So, very early in the cloud adventure. And unfortunately, they had a pretty significant data breach on that cloud side. And it was because the folks that designed those applications and built those applications 10 years ago, weren't thinking about security the same way that we do today. And of course, like most good applications, it's running and you don't want to you don't want to break it. If it's not broke, don't fix it kind of thing. So I think
Yep.
that was a really good example recently that we just ran into that we're trying to help them with.
That is definitely a scare. What do you think what's the lesson learned from that? Like what should other people listening, what other companies, what should they take away from that scenario?
I think it's twofold. It speaks to just general cybersecurity, hygiene and best practices. Make sure that
Hmm,
you're scanning and assessing your environment and testing and poking holes in your environment constantly. And I think it's exponentially more important in the cloud ecosystem because of the rapid scale and rapid deployment capabilities and opportunities within cloud. Security can be one of the things that's oft, left behind or underwhelming. So we need to treat that cloud infrastructure with as much or more cybersecurity assessing and cyber resilience planning as we do our on-prem infrastructures.
Do you think that's something that, from a what I would call an overlooked vulnerability, is that's one of the things that's often overlooked?
I think so. The cloud has given us such tremendous scale and growth capability within our infrastructures. But the app dev cycle is moving, faster than even the cybersecurity, life cycle is. And it's a challenge for many organizations because the tooling is different. The applications that you use are different to secure and assess those environments. And so many organizations in the hybrid cloud world are struggling with, not only securing and taking care of their on-prem, but then how do I do it in the cloud and what's the right way to approach that?
Interesting. So obviously the other part of Halloween is myths. So it's not just scares, there's myths going on. And I think in the world of IT and technology and cybersecurity, there's probably a lot of myths to be busted. And I'm curious from your perspective, when you think about third parties, suppliers, what's one of the kind of common misconceptions that you think is out there around that?
It's kind of along the same lines of what we talk about of assessing. It's almost that trust but verify model, right?
Hmm.
Many organizations, and even including Structured, have achieved things like SOC 2 Type 2 compliance, and we publish our how we're adhering to security, what our practices are, how we're keeping data secure, which are all tremendously important. And I'm taking nothing away from those. However, you constantly have to be testing against that, assessing against that, especially when you're thinking about your third party vendor relationships, partnerships, the supply chain side of it. Many organizations do kind of a first assessment, maybe when bringing on a new supplier, or do their original due diligence questionnaire, et cetera. But you get 5 years of the relationship, everything's working fine, and it's again easy to trust. And I think this cybersecurity and cyber resilience world, trust but verify has never been more meaningful.
I guess in that scenario, are there things that people should be looking out for? I mean, obviously, Structure has a long history of working with, you know, lots of companies. But are there red flags that you've seen that maybe other people that are looking at third parties and looking at suppliers, like, hey, here's a couple red flags that just be aware of?
I think that's it's probably one of the best questions and probably the hardest ones to answer. Appreciate you really putting me on the spot because
Yeah, no problem, no
again,
problem. It is
I'll
Halloween.
yes, exactly. No, I think that a great example is that due diligence questionnaire, and
Oh, okay.
it's maybe checkbox yes no with a little bit of context,
Hmm.
but are you taking the time to delve one step deeper? Do you want to see what that plan is? If it's are you digging into what those actual policies are, for example? Another one may be along the lines of, are you doing any sort of continuous vulnerability scanning and posture checking of those environments of those third party vendors and suppliers in those relationships with the tools and services you have access to, publicly available? It's everybody has a pretty large digital footprint now, and there's a lot of tools and services to be able to do some of that ongoing assessment and posture work. And I think that's often an overlooked piece of the kind of supply chain and third party risk management.
Awesome. Yeah. So those are some just practical things that people should be aware of, right? Don't what's the saying, right? Just don't sacrifice the efficiency, or don't sacrifice efficiency for being pragmatic, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, let's keep going. Let's talk, since we are keeping in the holiday spirit, let's talk about scary risks, and specifically around AI. So I don't know about you, but with Halloween, there's lots of funny images and lots of scary images you can create with AI these days. And I guess I'm just curious, this is obviously a very broad question, but where do you see AI fitting into cybersecurity? And is it something that should we be happy about or worried about?
It's I was listening to one of my favorite comedians podcasts recently, and he goes, I woke up last night and finally realized what AI is, and it's really dangerous. uh, we should be talking about what the implications are. And his co-host said something effective, yeah, that's kind of been what people have been talking about, for the last 5 years, but even really the last year. And is it is it still not enough? So I think that I think AI and cybersecurity have a tremendous opportunity to help and support your business, and obviously presents a tremendous risk. And I think that as the AI enabled tools and services, let's call them commercially available AI services,
Yeah.
are becoming more and more available, and things like ChatGPT and others are very publicly widely used services, it feels like over the last 6 to 12 months, the level of security conversation around using AI has really dropped off, when it really should be accelerating as we look ahead. And I think when you think about AI and cybersecurity, again, we have the assistance of AI helping our cybersecurity tools with research and analysis and prevention, which is tremendously valuable. But that's only one aspect of AI and security. When it comes to how are we deploying large learning modules and things for our own business, and what are we doing around just the security of that data set and that environment, and then what am I doing around the security and acceptable use by my team members, by my colleagues, by my business partners, of the data that's coming in and out of that environment, and what's happening with it. So there's a tremendous amount of education that needs to be done. You need to be looking at cybersecurity around AI very holistically and from a lot of different perspectives.
Do you think, I guess on that note, I mean, is it, depending on who you ask, you could say it's strengthened or it's weakened security, right? So do you think there's an opportunity for it to do both?
Absolutely. And I think, one of the, call it a simple example that I see is, again, I think about maybe a malware scanning and network prevention service or tool that I'm using, that's now using AI to assist me with looking at the heuristics and the behavior and analyzing that traffic to alert and report to me much more rapidly and much more efficiently. At the same time, the attackers are adapting to folks that are deploying those tools, but more importantly, they're using AI to make their attacks more efficient, much better. I think if we look back at the last year and a half of things like phishing attacks and fintech fraud scams, et cetera, they're using AI to generate extremely well-worded emails, to generate extremely realistic. In fact, my wife just got one of these, from our bank, and the link that came up, she noticed the URL wasn't right, but she was curious, so she still wanted to click on the link and see where it took her. She knew she wasn't going to fill anything, but she got to the website and it was a spitting image for our bank's login page. And then
Wow.
immediately after, she started getting texts saying, enter your verification code, etc. So never put any credentials in, knew the domain was wrong, but the way the page was formatted and looked was perfect. The way the emails and the texts were written were perfect, where we were able to use a lot of kind of, there was a common sense element to detecting, phishing and fintech scams and et cetera. And I don't think, we can rely on that anymore, because these things look and feel 100% legit, and there's only very small indicators of why it's not.
So when we think about, again, giving CISOs a fright, I mean, it sounds like part of this also is outside of just the pure technology. It's the training, it's the education. It's you actually almost need people and support more now because of it's getting so tricky.
Yes, I think that at the end of the day, this also speaks to AI. We humans are the weak element in most of these attacks, and it tends to be the human error or the human misconception or the human element that is unfortunately responsible for many breaches. So I think we need to ramp up training. Again, thinking about a recent conversation I had with somebody, they are still working on getting the business to buy off on fully rolling out a continuous phishing education program to their teams. And it feels like, as we close up 2024, move into 2025, that's minimum table stakes. And I think there's many organizations who are still struggling with that change in business process, and that's only one element of what we're talking about here, and really just email borne attacks, which of course is one of the top attack vectors. But the people and the process and the education is going to need to be significantly ramped up over the next 5 years as AI and threats continue to exponentially grow in strength and efficacy.
So how do we really let me zoom out a little bit on the fright of when you think of the building cyber resilience, you mentioned going into 2025. So, and looking to the future, what should a CISO be thinking about? Like, how do you start pragmatically building cyber resilience in this day and age?
Oh, I guess, Nick, if I had the answer to that, we wouldn't be on this call, because I'd be too busy helping clients do that. But no,
That's the $1 million question. You should hire structure.
yes, exactly. Oh, that was deleted. Sorry, I completely missed that marketing opportunity. No, I think we talked cyber resiliency and use that word, and it's like cloud. It's like a lot of these terms, right? It means a ton of different things.
Yeah.
But what it really comes down to is building out a thoughtful and methodical plan for how your users, your customers, and your business partners are accessing your environment, how you're securing that environment from the inside out and the outside in. So I think as you start thinking about, we've been talking zero trust, which is another big broad term, and it's overused, but there are very pragmatic steps that you can take on the zero trust journey that help you kind of incrementally increase your security posture. And it's how am I deploying the right identity and access management to make sure people are who they say they are, and they're logging in from where they're supposed to be logging in from? How do I segment my network to prevent the risk of a breach from moving laterally? How do I segment and secure and protect my applications and my keys to the kingdom from each other? And then, as we talked about earlier, how do I extend that same posture up into the cloud? And I think when I think about it, try to think about it really simply, I think the idea of treating all of our applications and all of our corporate assets and all of our users as though they are all untrusted. That's the first high level thought that I have. And then it's how do we start building the blocks and the pieces to get there? But I think that's the mindset we have to take, because cyber resilience at the end of the day is not really about preventing it. At some point, If somebody wants you bad enough, they're going to figure out a way to get into your environment. It's how do I limit the blast radius? How do I mitigate the risk? And how is my business continuity and recovery plan working to recover from that? So first I have to minimize the damage and I have to recover from the damage quickly. And so if I limit the risk of exposure from the world and from the outside, and if I have my environment properly segmented and secured, I'm reducing the blast radius, and then I have to have the right business continuity and DR planning to be able to spin those resources up while I go mitigate the damage and clean up and ensure that the bad actors are now out of my environment, almost in that order. It's becoming the business continuity and DR and getting my environment back up from a known good is more important, because otherwise that's how businesses lose too much money every day, to recover from these things, and then having a thoughtful plan for how I'm investigating, remediating, and cleaning up.
So the lesson here is trust no one.
Yep, and that's I'll try to take my tinfoil hat off for the rest of it. But if you start with that mindset, you just have to start start finding the building blocks and the foundational pieces we can deploy that give us those incremental benefits that really add up to that goal, and getting to 100% zero trust and 100% segmentation and fully untrusted world is a big daunting task. But like any other business and technology plan, this is a 5-year 10-year goal and agenda. This is not an overnight. This is not a product I go buy that makes me zero trust secure or what have you. It's absolutely a goal, and it's an evolution, and it's a series of small steps that make a big impact.
I guess, we started this out with, what gives CISOs a fright, but after this conversation, it almost begs the question, should we, it's not, all the things you talked about, yes, a CISO, I'm sure, loses sleep about this. I guess if I'm a CFO, if I'm, a CTO, if I'm a CEO, if I'm a COO, like all these things should give me a fright. Right? It's beyond the tech. A lot of what you talked about, to me, it does seem like from the horror story is it doesn't just affect technology and IT. This is truly business impacting. And I'm just wondering if that's a good lesson to be thinking about as you go into 2025.
I think you're spot on. And as we think about the AI revolution, as we think of cyber resilience, it is critically important that your team and your team that's involved in building this cyber resilience plan this is not an IT project. This is a cross-platform, cross-functional project across leadership, across line of business stakeholders, senior managers within your organization, et cetera. You need to have that representation and understanding and buy-in from everybody throughout the organization, representative of all your significant groups, because at the end of the day, a breach or an attack that brings down my business for even one day or half of a day results in tremendous losses, loss of customers, loss of financial revenue, loss of trust and brand reputation, et cetera, depending on your business. And so this is something to be taken seriously, and it's something that you need buy-in from everybody, because if we're going to train and enable users, I need support from all the frontline and line of business managers and their teams to help us reach a level of security maturity to make sure that all the tools and planning we put into the cyber resilient strategy and all the investment in cybersecurity solutions is worthwhile.
All right, well, we've talked about a lot, from horror stories to myth busting to utilizing securing AI to cyber resilience. Let's end with what's another horror story that would maybe put some context to people out there that are still maybe not even convinced that this is real.
It's
no, can't name names, I know, but you can tell.
No, exactly. No. We will actually protect
the innocent, for the guilty.
I think that one area that has, I think, a lot of organizations worked up, and we've had a lot of conversations, is around just the evolving compliance and regulatory frameworks that are hitting businesses that were never subjected to it. So I think of like CMMC that's affecting supply chain in federal contractors, et cetera. And often these are organizations that are large scale manufacturing with relatively, traditionally pretty minimal IT needs and requirements. It was a 4-wall environment, protect my assets, keep my IoT network offline. Well, that's not only changing and adapting to being more connected than ever, but they're getting, federal regulatory requirements that are coming down on them that are what the Fortune 100 was akin to 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and now it's affecting these small organizations. So we're having these shocks and scares, and often this might even there might not be a CIO present in some of these environments, maybe a senior VP or senior director of technology, partnered up with the COO or CFO type in the leadership standpoint, and very small IT teams, and they're being tasked with, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to meet these regulatory compliances in the next even 12 or 18 months, starting from where they're at? And again, it's back to the same thing that we said earlier, though. It's you have to start small. You have to find meaningful, impactful steps to that journey to mitigate as much risk as simply as you can, and then work from there to fill in the gaps. But we're seeing more and more state level, country level, and federal level regulatory compliance being pushed to organizations that have never been subjected to it. And that's giving all of those organizations a fright, because they don't even have a CISO or an Infosys team today.
So opportunity for those in the industry. There's lots of people that need help. So again, Bill, thank you so much for allowing me to join the structured conversation today, and lots of amazing insights for people listening. So hopefully we will talk to you again very soon. Thanks again.
Great talking to you, Nick. Thank you.